The howling wind threatened to drown out the pained whinny of Wyatt Owens' horse as they struggled through the worsening blizzard. February 1876, in the Arizona Territory, was proving brutal, even for a man who'd weathered 5 winters in these parts. The 28-year-old rancher squinted against the stinging snow, his gloved hands nearly frozen to the reins as he urged his mount forward toward the small cabin he called home, 3 miles outside of Seligman. Just a bit further, Rusty, Wyatt encouraged the struggling chestnut gelding, leaning forward to pat the horse's frost-coated neck. He shouldn't have risked the trip into town for supplies, but his stores had been running dangerously low, and the skies that morning had shown only hints of the impending storm. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying an unfamiliar sound that made Wyatt pull Rusty to a halt. He listened intently, wondering if his mind was playing tricks. There it was again, a human voice calling weakly through the howling gale. Wyatt turned his head, straining to locate the source. "Hello," he called out, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "Anyone out there?" The response came faintly from his right, toward a cluster of rocks and scrubby pine that marked the boundary of his property. Wyatt guided Rusty carefully in that direction, the horse picking his way through deepening snowdrifts. As they approached the rocks, Wyatt spotted a dark shape huddled against the stone, a person wrapped in what looked like a blanket crusted with snow. Wyatt dismounted quickly, stumbling slightly as his numb legs hit the ground. "Hey there," he called, approaching cautiously. "Are you hurt?" The figure shifted, and a woman's face emerged from the folds of the blanket. Her copper-toned skin was alarmingly pale, with cold, dark eyes glassy with exhaustion. Her black hair was partially covered with a traditional Apache headscarf, now crusted with ice. "Help," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please." Wyatt didn't hesitate. He knelt beside her, noting how she flinched slightly at his approach. "I've got a cabin not far from here," he said, speaking clearly. "Can you stand? I need to get you out of this cold." The woman nodded weakly. Wyatt helped her to her feet, noticing she favored her right leg. She clutched a small bundle to her chest that he hadn't noticed before. "My belongings," she explained, following his gaze. "All I have left. Keep hold of them then. My horse will carry us both." Wyatt guided her to Rusty, who stood patiently despite the biting cold. With considerable effort, he helped her mount before climbing up behind her. "I'm Wyatt," he said, reaching around her to grasp the reins. "Wyatt Owens." There was a moment of silence before she replied. "Nara or Akala." Her voice was soft but carried a strength that impressed him, given her condition. "Hold on tight, Nara. We'll be warm soon," Wyatt promised, turning Rusty toward home. The ride was grueling. Wyatt could feel Nara trembling against him, whether from cold or fear he couldn't tell. The snow was falling so heavily now that he navigated largely by instinct, trusting Rusty's sense of direction as much as his own knowledge of the land. After what seemed like hours but was likely only 20 minutes, the shadowy outline of his cabin appeared through the swirling white. Wyatt had never been so grateful to see the modest structure he'd built with his own hands 3 years prior. "There we are," he said, feeling Nara stir slightly. "Just hold on a bit longer." He guided Rusty directly to the small attached stable, dismounting quickly once they were sheltered from the worst of the wind. Nara nearly fell as he helped her down, her legs buckling beneath her. "I've got you," Wyatt said, catching her weight. Without asking permission, he swept her into his arms, noting with concern how light she felt despite the layers of clothing and blanket. Her bundle remained clutched tightly to her chest. Wyatt carried her through the connecting door into the cabin's main room, carefully setting her down on the chair nearest to the banked fire. He quickly added logs and kindling, working the embers until flames leapt to life. "Let's get you warm," he said, turning back to find Nara's eyes fixed on him, wary but grateful. In the light of the cabin, he could better assess her condition. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with high cheekbones and a proud bearing despite her exhausted state. Her clothing was traditional Apache, though worn and trail-stained. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes not leaving his face. "The storm came too quickly." Wyatt nodded, moving to the small kitchen area to put on a pot of coffee. "What were you doing out in this weather?" "It's nearly 15 miles to the nearest reservation." Something flashed in Nara's eyes, caution, perhaps fear. "I was traveling to my mother's sister near Flagstaff. I became lost when the snow began." Wyatt sensed there was more to her story but didn't press. "You're safe here." "The storm looks to last through tomorrow at least, but you're welcome to stay until it's safe to travel." He busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans and salt pork while Nara gradually thawed by the fire. Her posture remained tense, her bundle still held close. When Wyatt placed a steaming plate before her, she hesitated only briefly before eating with controlled hunger. He noticed her occasionally glancing toward the windows where snow continued to pile against the glass. "No one will find you here," he said quietly, intuiting her concern. "Not in this weather." Nara's eyes snapped to his, suddenly guarded. "Why would anyone be looking?" Wyatt shrugged, sipping his coffee. "Just a feeling. I'm not asking questions, Nara. I just want you to know you're safe." A long moment passed between them before she gave a slight nod. "Thank you," she said again, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. As night fell, the storm intensified. Wyatt made up a bed for Nara near the fire using his spare bedding, then retreated to his own bed on the opposite side of the one-room cabin, giving her what privacy he could. "Sleep well," he said. "We'll figure things out in the morning." In the flickering firelight, he saw her nod before she turned away from him, still clutching her bundle. Only when her breathing had deepened into sleep did Wyatt allow himself to close his eyes, wondering what circumstances had driven this woman to brave such deadly weather alone. The blizzard raged for 3 days. Outside, the world disappeared beneath a blanket of white that rose past the windowsills. Inside, Wyatt and Nara established a cautious routine. He respected her privacy, never asking directly about her circumstances, though his curiosity grew. On the morning of the 4th day, Wyatt woke to find Nara already up, standing by the window watching the now gentle snowfall. "Storm's breaking," he commented, rising to stoke the fire. Nara nodded, her profile silhouetted against the bright white outside. "Yes, soon the paths will clear." "No rush," Wyatt said, surprising himself with the realization that he meant it. "Snow's still deep, could be dangerous." Over a breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with the last of his molasses, Nara seemed more talkative than previous days. "You live here alone?" she asked, gesturing to the cabin. It was modestly built but solid, with clever touches that spoke of Wyatt's carpentry skills. "Yep, just me and Rusty since I claimed this land 3 years ago." He poured more coffee for them both. "Had a partner at first, but Ben headed to California after our first winter. Said Arizona territory was too wild for him." Nara's lips curved slightly. "And not for you. I like the challenge," Wyatt admitted. "Was raised in Illinois but never felt right there. Too crowded, too settled. Out here a man can breathe." "A woman too," Nara said softly, her eyes distant. The comment hung between them, an opening Wyatt decided to take. "Your people, are they worried for you?" Nara's expression shuddered slightly. After a long pause, she said, "I have no people now. Not since I refused to marry the man chosen for me." Wyatt listened silently as Nara explained how she'd been promised to a much older man, an arrangement made by her father before his death from fever the previous year. When she'd resisted, tensions escalated until she fled during a gathering, taking advantage of the distraction to escape. I had planned more carefully, she admitted. But when I learned they would come for me the next day, I had to leave immediately. And the snow caught you unprepared, Wyatt concluded. Yes, I would have died if not for you. Her dark eyes met his directly. A debt I cannot repay. There's no debt between us, Wyatt said firmly. Any decent person would have done the same. Perhaps, Nara said, though her tone suggested she believed otherwise. Still, I should continue to my aunt's home once the snow allows. Of course, Wyatt agreed, ignoring the unexpected pang of disappointment he felt. Though you're welcome to stay until the trails are truly safe. Another week passed before the snow melted enough to make travel feasible. During that time, Wyatt learned that Nara was skilled with natural remedies, knowledgeable about the local plants and their uses. She spoke English fluently, explaining that she had spent 2 years at a mission school as a child before her father removed her. Wyatt shared stories of his journey west, his struggles establishing his small ranch, and his hopes to expand his herd of cattle come spring. He found himself enjoying their conversations more than he had anticipated, impressed by Nara's quiet intelligence and determined spirit. On the day Nara announced she would leave the following morning, Wyatt spent extra time checking over his second horse, a steady gray mare named Pepper. "You'll take Pepper," he told Nara as they ate dinner. "She's sure-footed and knows the trail to Flagstaff." "I cannot take your horse," Nara protested. "It is too much." "You're not taking her," Wyatt clarified. "Just borrowing. Your aunt can arrange for her return when you're settled." He paused, then added, "Unless you'd prefer I escort you there." Something flickered in Nara's expression, reluctance, perhaps even fear. "No. It would be noticed if I arrived with a white man. It might create problems for my aunt." Wyatt nodded, understanding. Relations between settlers and Native Americans remained tense throughout the territory, with misunderstandings frequently escalating to violence. "Then Pepper will see you safely there. She's reliable." That evening, as Wyatt checked his supplies to prepare a small pack for Nara's journey, he found himself moving slower than usual, his thoughts troubled. The prospect of returning to his solitary existence felt unexpectedly bleak after these weeks of shared meals and conversations. Near sunset, he found Nara standing outside, watching the crimson light paint the snow-covered landscape. She had wrapped herself in one of his spare coats, her dark hair lifting slightly in the breeze. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, coming to stand beside her. "Yes." "Your land has strong medicine, good spirit," she glanced at him. "You chose well." "Sometimes I think it chose me," Wyatt admitted. "First time I saw this valley, I knew this was where I belonged." They stood in companionable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, casting long shadows across the pristine snow. In the growing darkness, Wyatt felt Nara shift slightly closer to him, whether seeking warmth or something else, he couldn't say. "I have never met a white man like you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Most look through me, not at me." Wyatt turned to face her, struck by the vulnerability in her usually guarded expression. "I see you, Nara. You're the strongest person I've ever met." The distance between them seemed to shrink, the cold air charged with unspoken possibility. For a breathless moment, Wyatt thought she might step closer. Instead, Nara drew back slightly, composing herself. "We should go inside," she said. "Morning comes early." That night, as they prepared for sleep in their respective corners of the cabin, Wyatt found himself wishing for a reason to ask her to stay. But what future could he offer her? His life was uncertain, his ranch barely established. and she had family waiting, a place where she would be understood and accepted in ways he couldn't guarantee. "Wyatt," Nara's voice came softly through the darkness. "Yes, thank you for everything. I will not forget." "Nor I," he replied, the simple truth of it settling in his chest like a physical weight. Morning dawned clear and cold. Wyatt saddled Pepper while Nara packed the provisions he'd prepared. Her few belongings and his carefully wrapped supplies fit easily into the saddlebags. "There's jerky, hardtack, and dried fruit," he explained. "Should last you 3 days, though the ride to Flagstaff shouldn't take more than 2 if the weather holds." Nara nodded, securing the last strap. She had changed back into her traditional clothing, now clean and mended during her stay. The transformation reminded Wyatt sharply of their different worlds. "The trail follows the creek for about 5 miles, he continued, pointing north. "Then you'll see the old trading post abandoned now, but the chimney still stands. From there, head northeast until you hit the main road to Flagstaff." "I understand," Nara said, checking Pepper's girth strap with practiced hands. "I will take good care of your horse." When everything was ready, they stood awkwardly beside the saddled mare, the moment of parting upon them. "Well," Wyatt said, rubbing the back of his neck, "I guess this is goodbye." Nara looked up at him, her dark eyes holding his. Without warning, she stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest, directly over his heart. "May your path be blessed, Wyatt Owens," she said formally. "May your herds grow fat and your winter stores never empty." Wyatt covered her hand with his own. "And may you find safety and peace with your family, Nara or Akala." She smiled then, a rare, full smile that transformed her face and caught Wyatt's breath in his throat. Before he could respond, she withdrew her hand and mounted Pepper in one fluid motion. "The Apache have a saying," she said, gathering the reins. "The journey matters more than the destination. You have made my journey meaningful, Wyatt." With that, she turned Pepper toward the north and urged her into motion. Wyatt watched until horse and rider became a distant speck against the vast white landscape, his thoughts a tumultuous mix of satisfaction at having helped her and a deep, unexpected sense of loss. Later that evening, as he sat alone by the fire, Wyatt realized that in the rush of Nara's departure, he had never learned exactly where in Flagstaff her aunt lived. The knowledge that he might never see her again settled over him like the winter cold, seeping into places he hadn't known were vulnerable. Spring came gradually to the high country around Seligman. Wyatt threw himself into work, expanding his small herd with 4 new calves, and beginning construction on a proper barn to replace his modest stable. Pepper had been returned 3 weeks after Nara's departure, brought by a Navajo trader who offered no information beyond saying he'd been paid to deliver the horse. By late April, wildflowers carpeted the valley, and Wyatt's thoughts turned increasingly to Nara. Had she reached her aunt safely? Was she building a new life among her people? Sometimes at night, he imagined her voice in the whisper of wind through the new leaves, remembered the weight of her hand over his heart. On a warm May afternoon, as Wyatt repaired fencing on the eastern edge of his property, he spotted a rider approaching from the direction of town. Standing to shade his eyes against the sun, he recognized Sheriff Miller from Seligman, a gruff but fair man who'd helped Wyatt navigate the complexities of establishing his land claim. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Wyatt called as the older man drew his horse to a halt. "What brings you out this way?" Miller dismounted, removing his hat to wipe sweat from his brow. "Checking on folks in the outlying areas. Had some reports of trouble with renegade Apaches south of here." Wyatt's heart quickened. "What kind of trouble?" "Raiding party hit the Jenkins place 3 days ago. Took their horses, some supplies." Miller shook his head. Army's been stirred up since. They're sweeping through known Apache territories. Anyone hurt? Wyatt asked, careful to keep his voice neutral. No, thank the Lord. Jenkins and his boys were in town when it happened. The missus hid in the root cellar. Miller accepted the canteen Wyatt offered. Army lieutenant asked me to warn folks to stay alert, maybe come into town until they've got the situation under control. Wyatt frowned. I've got livestock to tend, can't just leave. Miller nodded, understanding. Figured you'd say that. Just watch yourself, Owens. These aren't the reservation Apaches. Word is their Kairikahua moved north after trouble in Mexico. After the sheriff departed, Wyatt found himself scanning the surrounding hills with new awareness. He didn't believe Nara would be involved with any raiding party she'd been heading to Flagstaff, in the opposite direction, but the news unsettled him nonetheless. That night, Wyatt checked his rifle and kept it closer than usual, though he told himself it was merely sensible precaution. As he drifted to sleep, his thoughts were filled with memories of dark eyes and a voice soft as summer rain. The sound of hoofbeats woke him before dawn. Wyatt grabbed his rifle and moved silently to the window, peering out into the gray pre-morning light. A single rider approached cautiously, leading a second horse laden with packs. Wyatt positioned himself beside the door, rifle ready. When the soft knock came, he called out, "Who's there?" A moment of silence, then, "It is Nara." Wyatt yanked the door open, stunned to find her standing there, as real as his heartbeat. She looked thinner than when she'd left, her face more angular, but her eyes lit with recognition when she saw him. "Nara," he breathed. "What are you all right? May I come in?" She asked, glancing behind her toward the lightening horizon. "I should not be seen." Wyatt stepped back immediately, ushering her inside before helping her lead both horses to the stable. Once they were settled, he returned to find Nara standing by the fire he'd quickly kindled. "Are you in trouble?" he asked directly. She met his gaze steadily. "The Army is searching for all Apache not on reservations. My aunt's home was raided 2 weeks ago. They are taking people to Fort Apache, separating families. But you weren't part of any raiding party." Wyatt pressed, needing to be certain. Nara's eyes flashed. "No, we lived peacefully. My aunt sold baskets and pottery in Flagstaff, but after the raids began, soldiers came. They did not ask questions before they started burning homes." Relief and anger warred within Wyatt. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "That's not right." "No, it is not," she sighed, suddenly looking exhausted. "I did not know where else to go. I remembered your kindness." "You did right to come here," Wyatt assured her, moving to put coffee on. "You can stay as long as you need." Nara watched him, her expression guarded. "It may bring danger to you. I'll take that chance." Wyatt surprised himself with the firmness of his conviction. "We'll figure something out." Over the next days, they established a cautious routine. Nara stayed close to the cabin while Wyatt continued his regular work, alert for any visitors. In the evenings, they talked long into the night, sharing stories and gradually rebuilding the connection they'd formed during the winter. Nara spoke of her time with her aunt, of learning to make traditional baskets to sell to tourists in Flagstaff, of slowly beginning to heal from the rejection of her community. Wyatt told her of his plans for the ranch, his hopes to add horses to his cattle operation, his dreams of someday building a larger house on the rise overlooking the valley. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Wyatt broached the subject that had been weighing on his mind. "Sheriff Miller comes by every few weeks," he said carefully. "Sooner or later, he's going to notice I've got company." Nara nodded, her face composed. "I have been thinking about this. Perhaps I should continue north into the mountains where the soldiers do not patrol as often. The thought of her leaving again created a hollow feeling in Wyatt's chest. "That's one option," he agreed reluctantly. "But I was thinking of something else." She turned to him, curiosity in her dark eyes. "What? What if you weren't hiding?" Wyatt suggested. "What if you had a legitimate reason to be here, one even the army couldn't question?" "What reason would that be?" Wyatt took a deep breath. "Marriage." Nara's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. "Marriage, to you? It's just an idea," Wyatt said quickly, suddenly uncertain. "Legally, as my wife, you'd have protection. No one could force you onto a reservation. You would do this, marry an Apache woman you barely know." Nara's voice was incredulous. "I know enough," Wyatt said quietly. "I know you're brave and resourceful. I know you work hard and speak your mind. I know I've thought about you every day since you rode away." The confession hung between them as the last light faded from the sky. Nara looked away, her profile sharp against the darkening landscape. "This is not why I came to you," she said finally. "I did not seek a husband." "I know that," Wyatt assured her. "And if you say no, we'll find another way to keep you safe. But Nara—" He hesitated, then pressed on. "I think we could build something good together, if you wanted to try." She was silent for so long that Wyatt began to regret his impulsive suggestion. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and measured. "In my culture, marriage is not just between two people. It connects families, communities." She turned to face him. "I have no family to offer you, no community that would welcome you." "I don't need either," Wyatt said honestly. "I just need to know if the idea of building a life with me is something you could consider, not out of necessity, but because you might want it too." Another long silence fell. Above them, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. "I need time to think," Nara said finally. "This is not a small thing you ask." "Take all the time you need," Wyatt assured her, even as hope flickered uncertainly in his chest. 3 days passed with a new tension between them. Wyatt kept his distance, not wanting to pressure Nara, though each time their eyes met across the cabin, he felt the unspoken question between them. On the afternoon of the 4th day, as Wyatt returned from checking his herd, he found Nara waiting by the corral. She wore a dress he hadn't seen before, clearly fashioned from fabric she must have brought in her packs, her hair arranged in the traditional Apache style for special occasions. "I have been thinking," she said without preamble as he approached, "about your proposal." Wyatt nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. "And it would not be easy," Nara cautioned. "There would be those who disapprove on both sides. Children of such a union would belong fully to neither world." "I know," Wyatt acknowledged, "but they'd have us, and this land." He gestured to the valley spreading before them, lush with spring growth. "They'd have a home." Nara's expression softened. "You think of children already." "I think of possibilities," Wyatt corrected gently. "But only if they're possibilities you want to consider." Nara took a step closer. "When I fled my village, I thought I was leaving behind all chance of family. When I fled Flagstaff, I thought I was condemning myself to a life of running." Her dark eyes searched his face. "I did not expect to find shelter twice from the same man." "Is that a yes?" Wyatt asked, hardly daring to believe. "It is a beginning," Nara replied, a smile slowly transforming her serious face. "I will marry you, Wyatt Owens. We will see what kind of shelter we can build together." The simple ceremony took place 2 weeks later in Seligman, performed by the circuit preacher with Sheriff Miller and his wife as witnesses. Wyatt had been truthful with Miller about Nara's Apache heritage, but introduced her as the niece of a Flagstaff trader, recently orphaned close enough to the truth to explain her presence while avoiding dangerous details. The sheriff had looked skeptical but ultimately shrugged. "Your business who you marry, Owens. Just keep to yourselves and there shouldn't be trouble." Mrs. Miller had been more welcoming, presenting Nara with a small cake and assuring her that Seligman, though small, was more tolerant than many frontier towns. "My own grandmother was Cherokee," she confided as they shared tea after the ceremony. "Times are changing, slowly but surely." As they rode back to the ranch that evening, now husband and wife before the law, Wyatt glanced at Nara riding beside him. She wore a simple blue dress purchased in Seligman, her dark hair flowing freely down her back, caught occasionally by the gentle June breeze. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. Nara shook her head, meeting his gaze steadily. "No, but it is strange. Yesterday I had nothing. Today I have a husband and a home. And tomorrow," Wyatt prompted, guiding his horse closer to hers. Nara smiled, her expression more open than he'd ever seen it. "Tomorrow we begin building." Summer bloomed fully across the high country, bringing long days of sunshine and the occasional dramatic thunderstorm. Wyatt and Nara settled into a partnership that gradually deepened as they learned each other's rhythms and ways. Nara proved invaluable around the ranch, her knowledge of local plants supplementing their diet and medicine cabinet. She established a garden that thrived under her care, introducing varieties of squash and beans that her people had cultivated for generations. Wyatt expanded his cattle operation, adding 10 new head purchased with savings he'd accumulated over the previous years. Together, they completed the barn Wyatt had started, Nara revealing surprising strength and carpentry skills as they raised the framework and secured the roof before the summer rains began in earnest. Their marriage, begun as a practical arrangement, evolved gradually into something deeper. The first time Wyatt kissed her, nearly a month after their wedding, it happened naturally as they stood watching a particularly magnificent sunset. When he turned to comment on the colors streaking the sky, he found Nara already looking at him, her expression soft in the golden light. The moment stretched between them until Wyatt slowly leaned down, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. Instead, Nara rose slightly on her toes to meet him, her lips tentative at first, then warming as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, Wyatt kept his arms around her waist, reluctant to break the connection. "I've wanted to do that for a very long time," he admitted. "I know," Nara replied, a teasing light in her dark eyes. "You are not difficult to read, husband. And what am I thinking now?" Wyatt challenged, smiling down at her. Nara's expression grew serious. "That you wish to be truly married, in all ways." Wyatt nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the emotion tightening his throat. They had maintained separate sleeping areas in the cabin, honoring an unspoken agreement to give their relationship time to develop naturally. "Only when you're ready," he managed finally. "I won't rush you." "I know that too," Nara said softly. Taking his hand, she led him toward the cabin, her decision clear in every deliberate step. That night, as moonlight spilled through the cabin window, they discovered each other fully for the first time. Wyatt was gentle, attuned to Nara's responses, learning the contours of her body with reverent hands. Nara, initially shy, gradually matched his passion with her own, her natural reserve giving way to surprising ardor. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Nara traced patterns on Wyatt's chest, her expression thoughtful. "What is it?" he asked, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. "I was thinking of my mother," Nara admitted. "She married for duty, not love. I never saw tenderness between my parents." Wyatt tightened his arm around her. "Is that why you refused the marriage your father arranged?" "Partly," Nara confirmed. "I saw what such a union did to my mother. She became less. Each year her spirit dimmed." She propped herself up on one elbow to look into Wyatt's face. "I promised myself I would never allow that. "And now?" Wyatt asked, holding his breath. Nara's lips curved into a smile. "Now I think perhaps there is another way, a path where marriage strengthens rather than diminishes." As July gave way to August, their happiness was tempered by increasing reports of tensions between settlers and Apache bands. The Army maintained a heightened presence in the territory, and twice military patrols passed near their property, though neither approached the cabin directly. During one trip into Seligman for supplies, Wyatt overheard troubling conversations about proposals to relocate all Apache to distant reservations, regardless of their current status or situation. He kept this information from Nara initially, not wanting to worry her unnecessarily, but she read the concern in his face when he returned. "Tell me," she insisted that evening as they sat on the porch, taking advantage of the cooler air after a scorching day. "I see the shadow in your eyes, Wyatt." Reluctantly, he shared what he'd heard, watching her face carefully. Nara listened without interruption, her expression growing more controlled with each word. "So it begins again," she said when he finished. "The breaking of promises, the taking of land." "It's just talk for now," Wyatt assured her. "And you're legally my wife. They can't take you." "Can they not?" Nara challenged quietly. "Laws change when they become inconvenient. My father saw treaties made and broken within the same season." Wyatt took her hand, noticing the contrast of her copper skin against his sun-brown but lighter tone. "I won't let anyone take you from this home, Nara. I promise you that." She squeezed his fingers. "Some promises even you cannot keep, husband, but I love you for making them." It was the first time she had spoken of love, and the words hung in the summer twilight like the first stars appearing overhead. Wyatt pulled her gently to him, kissing her with all the emotion he couldn't express in words. "I love you too," he whispered against her lips. "More than I thought possible when I asked you to marry me." That night, they made love with a new intensity, as if the acknowledgement of their feelings had unlocked something deeper between them. Afterward, as Nara slept curled against him, Wyatt stared at the ceiling, resolving to do whatever necessary to protect the life they were building together. September brought cooler temperatures, and the first hints of autumn color to the aspen groves dotting the higher elevations. Wyatt and Nara worked side by side harvesting the garden's bounty, preserving what they could for the winter months ahead. It was during this peaceful time that Nara shared news that changed everything. "I am with child," she told Wyatt one evening as they sat by the fire, her voice calm though her eyes watched him carefully for his reaction. Wyatt stared at her for a moment, processing the information. Then a broad smile spread across his face as he moved to kneel before her chair, taking both her hands in his. "A baby." "You're sure?" Nara nodded, her own lips curving upward in response to his evident joy. "Yes, the signs are clear. The child will come in late spring, I think." "A child," Wyatt repeated wonderingly, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Our child." The news transformed their preparations for winter. Now, every jar of preserved vegetables, every cord of firewood stacked beside the cabin, every repair to the roof and walls took on new significance. This would be the home of their child, the beginning of a family neither had expected to find. As Nara's body began to change subtly with the pregnancy, Wyatt found himself watching her with a mixture of awe and concern. She continued her normal activities, despite his occasional protests, assuring him that Apache women worked until the very day of birth. "It keeps mother and child strong," she explained as she helped him repair fence posts on a crisp October afternoon. "Idleness is dangerous." Wyatt conceded the point, but insisted on taking over the heavier tasks as the weeks progressed. He also began expanding the cabin, adding a small second room that would serve as a nursery. Nara watched his efforts with fond amusement. "The child will sleep with us for the first year at least," she reminded him. "This work could wait." "I want everything ready," Wyatt insisted. "This little one deserves the best home we can provide." Nara's expression softened as she laid a hand on her gently swelling belly. "You will be a good father, Wyatt Owens." "I hope so," he replied, suddenly serious. "I want our child to be proud of both their heritages. To know your people's stories as well as mine." Nara regarded him thoughtfully. "It will not be easy. The child will walk in two worlds." "Then we'll make sure they're strong enough to do it," Wyatt said with determination. "Together." As winter approached, bringing the first snowfalls to the high country, Wyatt made one final trip into Seligman before the weather made travel difficult. While gathering supplies, he encountered Sheriff Miller outside the general store. "Owens," Miller greeted him with a nod. "Haven't seen much of you or your bride these past months." "Been busy with the ranch," Wyatt replied easily. "Getting ready for winter." Miller studied him for a moment. "Hear you're expanding your place, building on." "Just a small addition," Wyatt acknowledged. "We're expecting a child come spring." "Well now, congratulations," Miller said, though his expression remained guarded. "That's fine news." He glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. "Listen, Owens, there's been some talk. Army's getting pressure from Washington about the Apache situation. New orders coming down." Wyatt's heart quickened. "What kind of orders?" "All Indians to be on reservations by year's end. No exceptions." Miller held up a hand as Wyatt began to protest. "I know your wife's situation is different. Legally married and all. But some of these young lieutenants are eager to make their mark. They don't always check papers before acting." "What are you saying, Sheriff?" Wyatt asked, his voice tight. "I'm saying keep a low profile. Winter's coming, good excuse to stay put on your land." Miller adjusted his hat. "And maybe have those marriage papers handy, just in case." Wyatt thanked the sheriff for the warning, his mind racing as he completed his purchases and prepared for the journey home. The ride back to the ranch seemed longer than usual. His thoughts occupied with contingency plans and possibilities he'd hoped never to consider. When he finally arrived, Nara was waiting, as if she'd sensed his troubled return. She stood in the doorway of their cabin, one hand resting on her small baby bump, her face a question as he dismounted. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately. "I see it in your eyes." Wyatt didn't attempt to hide the truth. As they unloaded the supplies, he related his conversation with Miller, watching Nara's expression grow increasingly stoic. "So it comes to our door at last," she said when he had finished. "I knew it would eventually." "Nothing's going to happen," Wyatt insisted. "You're my wife. This is your home." Nara touched his cheek gently. "My brave husband, always believing he can stand against the storm." "We've weathered one blizzard together," he reminded her, covering her hand with his own. "We'll weather this one too." That night, as wind rattled the windows with the promise of snow, they held each other close, speaking softly of their hopes for their child, deliberately turning their thoughts to the future rather than the uncertainties of the present. The first significant snowfall came 3 days later, blanketing the valley and effectively isolating the ranch from Seligman. Wyatt found himself grateful for the natural barrier, hoping the winter would pass uneventfully, giving time for the tensions in the territory to ease. December arrived with bitter cold and deeper snow. Inside the snug cabin, Wyatt and Nara celebrated Christmas quietly, exchanging simple gifts. Wyatt presented Nara with a rocking chair he'd secretly constructed in the barn during odd moments over the previous weeks. Nara gave him a beaded leather belt she'd made, Incorporating both Apache designs and the cattle brand Wyatt had registered for his small herd. "For walking in both worlds," she explained as he admired the intricate workmanship. "Like our child will do." As they sat before the fire that evening, Wyatt's hand resting on Nara's now prominent belly, they felt the baby move for the first time, a definite kick that made them both laugh in delighted surprise. "Strong," Nara commented, placing Wyatt's hand where he could feel another movement. "Like his father." "Or her mother," Wyatt countered, grinning. The moment of joy was interrupted by the distant sound of horses approaching, unusual, given the deep snow and late hour. Wyatt rose quickly, moving to the window while reaching for his rifle. "Stay back," he told Nara, peering into the darkness. In the moonlight reflecting off the snow, he could make out 3 riders approaching the cabin, their military uniforms unmistakable even at a distance. "Army," he said grimly. "3 of them." Nara stood, her face composed though her eyes betrayed her fear. "What do we do?" Wyatt thought quickly. "Get our marriage certificate from the trunk, and stay calm. They have no legal right to disturb us." The pounding on the door came minutes later, authoritative and demanding. Wyatt opened it to find a young lieutenant flanked by 2 privates, all looking cold and impatient. "Evening, gentlemen," Wyatt said evenly. "You're a long way from Fort Whipple in this weather." "Are you Wyatt Owens?" the lieutenant demanded without preamble. "I am." "I'm Lieutenant James Preston, United States Army. We have information that you're harboring an Apache woman on these premises." "I'm not harboring anyone," Wyatt replied calmly. "My wife is here, yes." The lieutenant's eyes narrowed. "Your wife?" "Yes. We were married in Seligman this past June." Sheriff Miller was a witness. Wyatt held the door wider. "Would you care to come in out of the cold? My wife can offer you coffee." The hesitation in Preston's manner suggested he hadn't expected this response. After a moment, he nodded curtly and stepped inside, followed by his men. All 3 stopped short at the sight of Nara, clearly pregnant, standing calmly by the fire with their marriage certificate in hand. "Madam," the lieutenant acknowledged awkwardly. "Lieutenant," Nara replied with dignity. "May I offer you and your men refreshment? You must be cold." The incongruity of the scene, the heavily pregnant Apache woman extending hospitality in a well-appointed cabin while her white husband stood protectively nearby, seemed to throw the young officer off balance. That is, thank you, madam. Coffee would be welcome." As Nara prepared coffee, maintaining a composed demeanor that Wyatt knew masked significant anxiety, he engaged the soldiers in conversation, learning they were part of a patrol checking remote homesteads for unauthorized Indians following new directives from Washington. "All Indians are to be on reservations," Preston explained stiffly, "for their own protection and the safety of settlers." "My wife is legally married to an American citizen," Wyatt pointed out, indicating the certificate Nara had placed on the table. "That changes her status, as I'm sure you're aware." Preston examined the document, his frown deepening. "This appears to be in order," he admitted reluctantly. "But my orders supersede the law of marriage," Wyatt interrupted, keeping his voice level despite his rising anger. "I don't believe even the Army has that authority, Lieutenant." A tense silence fell, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the soft sounds of Nara moving about the kitchen area. Finally, Preston handed the certificate back to Wyatt. "I'll need to consult with my commanding officer," he said. "This situation is unusual." "Not as unusual as you might think," Wyatt replied. "There are several legal marriages between settlers and native women in this territory. The courts have upheld their legitimacy." After finishing their coffee and warming themselves by the fire, the soldiers prepared to leave. At the door, Preston turned to Wyatt with a warning. Don't attempt to leave this area, Mr. Owens. Consider yourself and your wife under observation until this matter is clarified." "We're not going anywhere, Lieutenant," Wyatt assured him, glancing at Nara's pregnant form. "As you can see, we have good reason to stay put." After the soldiers departed, Wyatt and Nara stood in silence, listening to the receding sound of hoofbeats. "They will be back," Nara said finally. "With more men, perhaps," Wyatt nodded grimly. "Probably, but we've done nothing wrong. The law is on our side." "The law," Nara repeated softly. "My people have learned not to trust in white men's laws. They change like the wind." "Not this time," Wyatt promised, drawing her into his arms. "Not when it comes to our family." Despite his confident words, Wyatt spent a restless night, rising frequently to check the perimeter of their property. The next morning, he reinforced their supplies and prepared for the possibility of an extended period of isolation. 2 weeks passed without further visitation from the army. As Christmas gave way to the new year of 1877, Wyatt began to hope that Lieutenant Preston's superiors had confirmed the legality of their situation and decided to leave them in peace. January brought the harshest weather of the winter, with temperatures dropping well below zero and snowdrifts piling against the cabin walls. Nara, now in her 6th month of pregnancy, maintained her strength and spirits, though Wyatt noticed she tired more easily and often sat in her rocking chair by the fire, singing soft Apache songs to her unborn child. On a particularly bitter morning in late January, as Wyatt returned from tending the livestock in the barn, he spotted riders approaching from the east, a larger group than before, at least 6 men, struggling through the deep snow. "Nara," he called, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "We have company again." She appeared beside him at the window, her expression calm though her hand instinctively moved to protect her swollen belly. "More soldiers." "Yes, and it looks like Preston is leading them." They watched in tense silence as the patrol approached. This time, Wyatt noted with growing concern, they spread out to surround the cabin rather than approaching directly. "I don't like this," he murmured. "Stay inside. I'll meet them out front." "No," Nara said firmly, gripping his arm. "We face them together. They must see that I am your wife, not a captive or fugitive." Wyatt hesitated, then nodded. "Together, then. But stay behind me until we know their intentions." They stepped onto the porch as Lieutenant Preston dismounted and approached, his expression grim beneath his frost-covered hat. 5 other soldiers remained mounted, their rifles not quite pointed at the cabin but held ready. "Mr. Owens," Preston acknowledged coldly. "I have orders to escort the Apache woman to Fort Whipple for processing and assignment to the San Carlos Reservation." "That Apache woman is my wife," Wyatt replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "As we established during your last visit, she's not going anywhere." Preston's jaw tightened. "New directives have been received from Washington. All Indians, regardless of marital status, are to be relocated to designated reservations. It's for their own safety." "She's carrying my child," Wyatt said, struggling to maintain his composure. "Due in just a few months. You can see for yourself she's in no condition to travel, especially to San Carlos. The conditions there are deplorable." "I have my orders, Mr. Owens." Preston's hand moved to rest on his holstered pistol. "Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Nara stepped forward then, her head held high despite the fear Wyatt knew she must be feeling. "Lieutenant Preston, I am Nara Owens, legally married under United States law. My husband is a tax-paying citizen with registered property. By what right do you come to our home and demand I leave?" The young officer seemed taken aback by her perfect English and dignified manner. He hesitated, glancing at his men before responding. "Madam, I understand your situation is complicated, but my orders are clear. All Apache are to be relocated. No exceptions. Even pregnant women in the dead of winter, Wyatt challenged, his anger rising. What kind of men are you? The kind following orders, Preston snapped. Mrs. Owens will be provided appropriate care at Fort Whipple before transfer to San Carlos. She's not going, Wyatt said flatly, shifting slightly to block Preston's view of Nara. I suggest you return to your commanding officer and explain the situation more clearly. My wife is legally under my protection as a United States citizen. Taking her against her will would constitute kidnapping. The confrontation might have escalated further had not fate intervened in an unexpected form. One of the mounted soldiers suddenly called out, pointing toward the western ridge where a group of riders had appeared, moving rapidly toward the cabin. "Lieutenant, we've got company." Preston spun around, momentarily distracted. Wyatt recognized Sheriff Miller leading 3 men from town, all armed and determined, looking despite the bitter cold. "What's this?" Preston demanded as Miller and his group drew near. "Might ask you the same question, Lieutenant," Miller replied coolly, dismounting with a grunt. "Seems like a lot of firepower for a social call on a rancher and his pregnant wife." "This is military business, Sheriff," Preston said stiffly. "We have orders, and I have jurisdiction," Miller interrupted. "Last I checked, this land isn't a military reservation. It's Arizona territory, where I'm the law." He glanced at Wyatt and Nara. "Everything all right here, Owens?" "Lieutenant Preston was just explaining that he has orders to take my wife to a reservation," Wyatt said, relief at Miller's timely arrival evident in his voice. "Despite our legal marriage and her condition." Miller's bushy eyebrows rose as he turned back to Preston. "That right, Lieutenant. Planning to drag a pregnant woman through 20 miles of snow to satisfy some paper pusher in Washington." Preston's face reddened. Whether from cold or embarrassment wasn't clear. "My orders, let me see those orders," Miller interrupted, holding out a gloved hand. After a moment's hesitation, Preston retrieved a folded document from inside his coat and handed it over. Miller read it slowly, his weathered face impassive. "Interesting," he said finally. "Says here all unmarried Apache individuals residing outside reservation boundaries are to be relocated. Unmarried, Lieutenant. Mrs. Owens doesn't qualify." "Sir, my understanding was—" "Your understanding needs work," Miller said bluntly, returning the paper. "Now, I suggest you and your men head back to Fort Whipple before this weather worsens. I'd hate to be responsible for losing a patrol of U.S. soldiers to frostbite." The standoff stretched for several tense moments before Preston finally nodded curtly. "This matter isn't closed, Sheriff. I'll be reporting your interference to my commanding officer." "You do that," Miller replied evenly. "And I'll be writing to the territorial governor about the Army's interesting interpretation of marriage law. Should make for enlightening correspondence." After the soldiers departed, Miller and his men accepted Wyatt's invitation to warm themselves inside the cabin before making the return journey to Seligman. "Don't know how long that'll hold them off," Miller warned as he prepared to leave. "Preston's the ambitious type. Might try again with different orders or a different interpretation." "We appreciate the warning," Wyatt said, shaking the sheriff's hand. "And your timely arrival today." Miller glanced at Nara, who had thanked him with quiet dignity. "Mrs. Owens is a citizen by marriage. That counts for something in my book, whatever Washington thinks." He adjusted his hat. "Besides, my wife would have my hide if I let them take a woman in her condition anywhere in this weather." After Miller and his men departed, Wyatt and Nara stood for a long time in silence, watching the snow begin to fall again, erasing the tracks of their visitors. "It is not over," Nara said finally. "They will try again." "Probably," Wyatt agreed, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "But we have friends we didn't know about, and the law is still on our side, whatever Preston claims." Nara leaned into his embrace, her hand cradling her belly where their child grew. "Our son will be born into a world of conflict, or our daughter into a world of change," Wyatt countered gently. "Either way, we'll face it together." February passed without further incident, though Wyatt maintained a heightened vigilance, never venturing far from the cabin and keeping his rifle close at hand. Nara's pregnancy progressed normally, her belly growing rounder as their child developed within her. In early March, as the first signs of spring began to appear longer days, occasional patches of ground visible through melting snow, Wyatt made a careful trip into Seligman for supplies and information. Sheriff Miller confirmed that the Army had been ordered to focus on more pressing concerns following Apache raids further south, temporarily easing pressure on isolated cases like Nara's. "Don't get comfortable, though," Miller cautioned. "Policy's still policy. They might circle back once things settle down elsewhere." Wyatt returned home with this mixed news, determined to prepare for whatever might come. He and Nara discussed various scenarios, including the possibility of relocating further north or west if pressure resumed, though neither wanted to leave the home they'd built together. As April brought genuine thaw to the high country, Nara's time grew near. She moved more slowly now, her belly preceding her, her face sometimes tightening with practiced contractions that her people called the child testing the path. Wyatt arranged for a midwife from town, an older woman named Mrs. Calloway, who had delivered half the children in the Seligman area and was known for her discretion and skill. She visited twice, checking Nara's condition and pronouncing both mother and baby healthy. "First babies often take their time," she assured Wyatt when he expressed concern about the distance between their ranch and town. "But I'll come stay for a few days when she's closer. Got a feeling about this one, though, strong and eager to meet the world." The prediction proved accurate. On a clear morning in late April, as Wyatt returned from tending the cattle, Nara met him at the door, her face both serene and determined. "It is time," she said simply. "The child comes today." Wyatt's heart leapt into his throat. "I'll get Mrs. Calloway," he said, already turning toward the stable. "There is time yet," Nara assured him. "The early pains are still far apart, but yes, go now while you can." The ride to Seligman and back with Mrs. Calloway seemed to take an eternity, though in reality it was just a few hours. When they returned, they found Nara calmly walking the perimeter of the main room, pausing occasionally to breathe through contractions. "Well now," Mrs. Calloway said approvingly, removing her shawl. "You're doing just fine, Mrs. Owens. Let's see how things are progressing." The labor lasted through the afternoon and into the evening, Nara displaying a stoicism that awed Wyatt even as he ached witnessing her pain. Mrs. Calloway kept him usefully occupied boiling water, preparing clean linens, and occasionally supporting Nara as she walked or knelt through the increasingly intense contractions. As night fell, the labor intensified. Mrs. Calloway shooed Wyatt from the bedroom they'd prepared, assuring him that everything was proceeding normally despite Nara's obvious discomfort. "Babies come in their own time, Mr. Owens. Your job now is to wait and pray if you're so inclined." Wyatt paced the main room, flinching at each muffled sound of Nara's pain. The waiting seemed interminable, stretching his nerves to breaking point. Just when he thought he couldn't bear another moment, a different sound pierced the night, the unmistakable cry of a newborn child. He froze, his heart pounding as he stared at the bedroom door. Minutes later, though it seemed like hours, Mrs. Calloway appeared, her lined face wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Mr. Owens. You have a son. A fine, healthy boy." Wyatt swayed slightly, gripping the back of a chair for support. "And Nara, my wife, tired but well. She did beautifully." Mrs. Calloway patted his arm. "Go meet your son. I'll fix some tea." Entering the bedroom on unsteady legs, Wyatt found Nara propped against pillows, her face exhausted but radiant as she cradled a small bundle against her breast. She looked up as he approached, her smile tremulous with emotion. "Husband," she said softly, "come meet your son." Wyatt sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed as Nara tilted the bundle to reveal a tiny face with a shock of dark hair, skin a perfect blend of his own and Nara's. "He's beautiful," Wyatt whispered, gently touching the infant's cheek with one finger. "Perfect." "He will be strong," Nara said with certainty. He announced himself to the world with a warrior's cry. Wyatt smiled, blinking back unexpected tears. "What shall we call him? We never decided." Nara considered, studying the baby's face. "In my tradition, we would wait, let the child reveal his name through his nature, but I know your people choose names at birth." She looked up at Wyatt. "What do you wish?" "My father was Thomas," Wyatt said thoughtfully. "A good man, strong like you said." "Thomas," Nara repeated, testing the name. "It is a good sound, but perhaps he should have an Apache name as well, to honor both sides of his heritage." They settled on Thomas Nilchie Owens Thomas, for Wyatt's father, Nilchie meaning strong wind in Apache, a name that acknowledged the forces that had brought his parents together during that fateful blizzard more than a year before. Mrs. Calloway stayed for 2 days, teaching Wyatt basic skills for supporting Nara and caring for the newborn before pronouncing mother and child healthy enough for her to return to town. "Send word if you need me," she told Wyatt as he helped her mount her horse. "But I suspect your wife knows more about babies than most women twice her age. Apache ways with children are worth learning from." The first weeks with Thomas passed in a blur of joy and exhaustion. Wyatt marveled at Nara's seemingly instinctive understanding of their son's needs, while she expressed surprise at Wyatt's natural aptitude for soothing the baby when he fussed. "You have gentle hands for such a big man," she observed one evening as Wyatt walked the floor with Thomas, who had been restless all afternoon but now slept peacefully against his father's shoulder. "Had practice with newborn calves," Wyatt joked, "though this one's considerably better looking." As May warmed into June, the little family established new rhythms around Thomas's needs. Wyatt resumed full management of the expanding ranch, while Nara incorporated the baby into her daily activities, often carrying him on her back in the traditional Apache cradle board she had crafted during the winter months. It was during this peaceful time that Sheriff Miller paid them an unexpected visit. Wyatt was in the corral breaking a young horse when the sheriff rode up, his expression unreadable beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Wyatt called, handing the horse off to his recently hired ranch hand, a local boy named Jimmy who helped with the larger herd. "What brings you out this way?" "News, Owens." Miller dismounted stiffly. "Thought you should hear it from me first." Something in the sheriff's tone made Wyatt's stomach tighten. "Come inside," he invited, leading the way to the cabin where Nara was preparing the midday meal, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle board nearby. After greeting Nara respectfully and admiring Thomas, Miller accepted coffee and got to the point. "Army's implementing new policies regarding Indians living off reservation," he said without preamble. "Stricter than before. They're sending patrols out next week to enforce compliance." Wyatt's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "What exactly does that mean for us?" Miller sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through his thinning hair. Official line is that all Apache, regardless of circumstances, are to report to Fort Whipple for processing and assignment to reservations. No exceptions this time. Even legally married women with infant children, Wyatt demanded, anger rising in his chest. The order doesn't specifically address that situation, Miller admitted, but the intent is clear. They want all Apache under direct government control. Nara, who had been listening silently, spoke up. What will happen if I refuse to go? Miller's gaze shifted uncomfortably. They'd likely try to remove you forcibly, and if Wyatt interferes. He left the sentence unfinished. A heavy silence filled the cabin, broken only by Thomas's soft breathing. Finally, Wyatt spoke, his voice tight with controlled fury. This is wrong, legally and morally wrong. Nara is my wife. This is her home. I don't disagree, Miller said wearily, but I'm telling you what's coming. You've got maybe a week before they start these sweeps. He hesitated, then added, some folks in similar situations are heading west. California is not enforcing these policies as strictly, from what I hear. After Miller departed, Wyatt and Nara discussed their options late into the night, weighing the risks of each potential choice. We could leave, Wyatt suggested. Start over in California or Oregon, somewhere they don't know us. And abandon all we have built, Nara questioned. Your land, our home. None of that matters compared to keeping you and Thomas safe, Wyatt insisted. Nara touched his face gently. This is our home, husband. I do not want to run, not again. Then what? I won't let them take you to San Carlos. The conditions there are deadly, especially for infants. Nara was silent for a long moment, her expression thoughtful as she gazed at Thomas sleeping nearby. Perhaps there is another way, one that uses their own laws against them. Over the next days, they formulated a plan. Wyatt rode into Seligman to consult with the circuit judge who happened to be in town, presenting their situation and receiving crucial advice. He also spoke with Miller again, securing the sheriff's reluctant agreement to assist if necessary. Meanwhile, Nara prepared Thomas for what might be a difficult period ahead, ensuring he was well fed and strong. She also wrote a detailed letter with Wyatt's help, documenting their marriage, Thomas's birth, and their legal status as a family. When Lieutenant Preston and a squad of soldiers appeared at their ranch exactly 1 week after Miller's warning, they found Wyatt waiting calmly on the porch, unarmed but resolute. Mr. Owens, Preston acknowledged stiffly. I have orders to— I know why you're here, Wyatt interrupted. And I have something you need to see before we proceed. He held out a legal document bearing official seals. Preston frowned, taking the paper reluctantly. As he read, his expression changed from confidence to confusion. What is this? He demanded. An injunction from Judge Hamilton, the federal circuit judge for this district, Wyatt explained evenly. It prohibits the removal of Nara Owens from this property, pending a full hearing on her citizenship status as my legally wedded wife and the mother of my son, who is by birth a United States citizen. Preston looked up, clearly taken aback. This delays matters but doesn't change the policy, Owens. Perhaps not, Wyatt agreed, but it gives us due process under the law, something your orders were attempting to circumvent. He gestured toward the cabin. My wife and son are inside. You're welcome to verify their presence, but according to that document, neither can be removed without a proper hearing. The standoff lasted several tense minutes before Preston reluctantly ordered his men to stand down. This isn't over, he warned as they prepared to depart. Washington wants these situations resolved. And they will be, Wyatt replied confidently, through proper legal channels. After the soldiers left, Wyatt entered the cabin to find Nara waiting, Thomas held close to her chest, her expression a mixture of relief and lingering tension. "It worked?" she asked. "For now," Wyatt confirmed, embracing them both. "The judge's injunction buys us time, and Miller thinks the Army may back down rather than fight individual cases through the courts, especially with a white citizen as plaintiff." "And if they do not back down?" Nara pressed. Wyatt met her gaze steadily. "Then we fight them in court, and if that fails, we have plans to leave quickly." He kissed her forehead. "But I believe we've won this battle, Nara. They don't want the publicity of forcibly separating legal families." The next weeks proved Wyatt right. While the Army continued rounding up isolated Apache individuals throughout the territory, they avoided confrontations with legally married couples, particularly those with children. The judge's temporary injunction was extended, and eventually, after consultation with higher authorities in Washington, a special exemption was granted for Indians legally married to citizens and their offspring. By high summer, the immediate threat had passed. Wyatt expanded their ranch operations, adding horses to their cattle business and hiring 2 more hands to help with the increased workload. Nara, with Thomas either on her back or playing nearby, established a thriving vegetable garden whose surplus they sold in Seligman, gradually building acceptance within the community. Thomas grew quickly, a sturdy boy with his mother's dark eyes and his father's determined chin. By autumn, he was crawling energetically, exploring every corner of the cabin and yard under his parents' watchful eyes. On the anniversary of their marriage, Wyatt surprised Nara with plans for a larger house on the property, showing her drawings he'd worked on secretly with the help of a carpenter from town. "We need more space," he explained as they stood on the rise where the new home would be built. "For Thomas to grow, and maybe for brothers and sisters someday if you want that." Nara smiled, watching Thomas playing with a carved wooden horse nearby. "I would like that very much," she admitted. "A large family in a home built with love." Wyatt pulled her close, still marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "When I found you in that blizzard, I never imagined what you would build in my life," he said softly. "A family, a future, a purpose larger than myself." "And I never imagined finding shelter that would become a home," Nara replied, reaching up to touch his face. "You saved more than my life that day, Wyatt Owens. You saved my heart." As they stood together watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson, Thomas crawled over to tug at his father's pant leg. Wyatt lifted him effortlessly, settling the boy on his shoulders where he giggled and patted his father's head. "Our son will have a good life here," Nara said with quiet confidence. "Walking in 2 worlds but firmly rooted in both, he will be strong because he knows who he is and where he belongs." "With us," Wyatt said simply. "Always with us." The autumn of 1877 gave way to winter, then spring again. The new house rose steadily on the rise overlooking the valley, larger and more comfortable than their original cabin, but retaining its welcoming spirit. Thomas took his first steps as the last roof beam was placed, toddling unsteadily from Nara to Wyatt as workers cheered the milestone. By Thomas's second birthday in April 1879, the Owens Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the area, known for quality horses and cattle. Wyatt's fair business practices earned him respect throughout the territory, while Nara's knowledge of local plants and healing traditions brought people from as far as Flagstaff seeking her advice. Their family expanded with the birth of a daughter, Sarah Nasha Owens. In the summer of 1880, a delicate but strong-willed girl with her father's lighter coloring but her mother's graceful movements. Thomas appointed himself her protector from the moment he first saw her, a role he took very seriously despite his tender age. The challenges they'd faced in their early years together gradually eased as the territory itself evolved. While prejudice certainly hadn't disappeared, their family's obvious success and stability earned them a measure of acceptance that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. On a warm evening in 1882, as they sat on the porch of their home watching Thomas and Sarah play in the yard, Nara turned to Wyatt with a contemplative expression. "You ever think about that winter storm?" she asked. "The one that brought us together?" Wyatt smiled, taking her hand in his. "Often. I thank God for it, though at the time I cursed it for nearly freezing us both." "My people believe that great winds carry change," Nara said softly. "That blizzard changed everything for me, for you, for our children." "For the better," Wyatt affirmed, watching Thomas help his little sister climb onto the low branch of the oak tree they'd planted when he was born. "Yes," Nara agreed, leaning against his shoulder, "though the path was not always easy." "The best journeys rarely are," Wyatt replied, kissing the top of her head, "and ours is far from over." As twilight deepened into night, they called the children in for supper. Moving inside to the warm, lamp-lit kitchen of the home they had built together, not just the physical structure of wood and stone, but the family that filled it with laughter and love, the legacy they were creating day by day. In the soft glow of the evening lamp, as Thomas regaled them with tales of his adventures exploring the creek, and Sarah carefully arranged her wooden animals in complex formations on the floor, Wyatt caught Nara's eye across the table. The look they shared held all the unspoken depth of their journey from strangers thrust together by circumstance to partners bound by choice and love. Outside, a gentle spring breeze stirred the trees, nothing like the howling blizzard that had once threatened their lives. Yet Wyatt recognized it as part of the same continuous flow, the changing seasons, the cycle of beginnings and growth, the ongoing story of shelter found and life built in the most unexpected of circumstances.